Good afternoon, my name is Askania-Nova and I'm happy to see everybody who joins us here in this studio of Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum and online. We invited all of you today to talk about the consequences of war for national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and conservation areas. We will be talking about the losses inflicted on our country, on our natural reserves. We will be talking about what to do with it and how to restore them. Our guests today are Arustamyan, the director of the department at the Ministry of Environmental Protection, Oleksiy Vasyliuk, head of the Ukrainian Nature Conservation NGO, Bohdan Kuchenko, climate department expert at Ecoaction. Joining us online will be Bohdan Vykhor, executive director at WWF-Ukraine. And joining us a little bit later will be Viktor Shapoval, director at the Biosphere Reserve, Askania-Nova. Good afternoon, dear friends. Mr. Eduard, let's start with you. So how does the occupation influences our national parks, our sanctuary and conservation areas? So talking about losses, what do we understand for the time being? What is the amount? Good afternoon. Really, the Russian aggression inflicts irreparable damage to the conservation areas and natural reserves that our ministry works with. So today it's Zherelghatsky National Park, Belobережье Svetoslava National Park, Oleksiy Peski National Park, Priazovsky National Park, National Park Miatida, Askania-Nova, Kamyanska Sich. Thanks God, Kamyanska Sich is deoccupied. However, the territory is densely mined. Until this very moment it's being shelled. The debris of the rockets fall on the territory of these natural reserves, so it's still dangerous there. Maybe I forgot some place. Vasyliuk, yes, Vasyliuk National Park. In the same way, the nature complexes are being destroyed. I mean, the wildfires, for example, in Kamyanska Sich, it was more than 100 fires. And apart from such factors as fires, shells, rockets, the orcs are involved in illegal fishing, illegal hunting, and there were cases in Priazovsky National Parks where they established a tank polygon, and they keep shelling the area, destroying the biosphere. They fish the sea products in tons. There is the mass plague pestilence of the dolphins in the Black Sea, which results from the loud sounds from the explosions. Well, the director of Askania-Nova may give you more detail about that specific place, but we know that there are collections of rare animals which are under threat of deportation. The ministry appealed to all the conventions for in this area. Well, talking about the losses, do we understand the scale of losses? We know about the general losses which are being documented by the state ecological inspection. Obviously there are techniques. There will be committees established headed by the heads of regional administrations, so the preliminary losses are about 2 trillion hryvnias. Specifically in those territories. It's difficult to say what is the amount of losses because we don't have full understanding due to the lack of access to the places. In absolute figures, I cannot give you the exact numbers, but they will be quite substantial. Talking about the legal steps taken by Ukraine as a state to bring the criminals to liability, what do we do in this area? I told you there are techniques. There are 7 techniques for the land, for the natural reserves. So those are the techniques to calculate the amount of losses. They will be transferred to the legal plane, legal dimension, and those figures will be submitted to the relevant courts. And every single hryvnia will be enforced, we know it for sure, and the criminals will be brought to liability. Mr. Oleksiy, question may be to you from the point of view of natural protection. What do you document? What can we do about it? Well, first of all, we don't do the documenting of losses because there is no access to the majority of the areas. A lot of conclusions can become to using the aerial photography. Many people do it. They can calculate the areas of burnt forests. We see that in Nizhny-Dniprovsky National Park, all those islands between Kherson and the left bank of Kherson region, it's a big national reserve, and there are battles going on there, but it's one of the biggest areas of concentration of the water birds in the Black Sea region. The spring is not yet over, but we know for sure that it will be the 2nd year in a row that the birds will not be able to nest there, and is the biggest region in terms of the colonies, of the numbers of the colonies of the water birds, and we cannot document the number of newly shelled birds, the chickens, and it's not documenting its analysis anyway. Our Ukrainian Nature Protection Group, under normal conditions when there is no war, we were initiating the creation of a new reserve areas. We cooperate closely with the Parliament and the Ministry of Environment on legislation in the area of natural reserves, but this year of war, it broke all of our plans, just like for all other Ukrainians, and for us it was only meaning support of our colleagues in the national parks and conservation areas. The National Park of Askania-Nova, for example, we are happy that it was founded in 1889 and it was legalized in Ukraine in 1919. It went through 2 world wars, and if you visit the website of the national park, before Russians captured the administration, we were able to support them with donations. Well, you could not transfer anything to their account, and it was said in the website that if you want to support the national park, donate money to Ukraine nature protection groups, and until certain time we could support them. There is the farm which is registered in Vinnytsia region, but it's located physically in Kherson region, so you may pay to an account based in Vinnytsia region, and the people will bring fodder to the animals in Kherson region. And Askania was working under Ukrainian flag. It was the single state institution that was working under Ukrainian flag, which is very touching. It was not only the unique natural reserve, but the unique state enterprise in terms of operation under Ukrainian flag. Well, regarding the losses and damage, what we try to analyze, two basic conclusions are that we cannot document a lot of things already. There were million explosions, well, more than millions. I don't know how many pieces of ammunition exploded there, but we understand that this number is way over 1 million, and according to some estimates it's more than 2.5 million. It's even more than the whole Vietnam War, and it resulted in emission of some chemical substances in the air and on the land. But how can we calculate what exactly was destroyed, what was in that place at the moment of explosion? We will never find it out. There is south of Ukraine and east of Ukraine, for example. Those are the places of endemicity, and it means that there are endemic species located there. And another place of such concentration is Crimea, but thanks God there are no such intense battles going on in Crimea. There are dozens of species of plants and birds and animals which live there, which have their natural habitats there, and they don't show up anywhere else in the world. For example, in Mykolaiv, where Russians were forced to withdraw, everything was burned there, and there are two types of kingpins there. They are one of the most rare types of plants in Ukraine, and it can be equalized to a wonder that they still exist, but we don't know for sure if they still exist because intense battles were going on in that area, and we don't know for sure that they still exist. There are 20 species of the plants which are listed in the Red Book, and one was not added there, so it's 21 species of plants which are unique in that area, unique to on a global level, and we cannot exclude the possibility that they don't exist anymore, and we cannot even evaluate whether they exist or not, let alone calculation of losses. Well, we know there were fires, there are shells going on there, so we can only hope that all those species were preserved, but in the same way we may hope that the war ends tomorrow, but we don't have 100% guarantee that it will happen tomorrow. So it's our preliminary conclusion, and we will only know for sure when we have access to that territory. Another important moment is that there may be some amount of losses verbalized. What is verbalized even now, I root only to have Russia pay all the reparations, or that Ukraine otherwise is being compensated those funds at Russian account. Otherwise it's not victory. But again, are we going to be able to compensate it with the money that we get back? Just like the death of a close ones. How much money should Russia pay to those people for their loss? Obviously you cannot compensate it with the money. Well, certain number of live organisms on the planet will be destroyed. For example, in National Park Vykhor there was a number of fires there. In a climate like this, we cannot plant a new forest there. We may get any amount of money, but there were oaks which remember Bohdan Khmelnytsky. For what I understand, he was not physically visiting that area, but they were growing when Bohdan Khmelnytsky was heading the liberation competition. So how much should Ukraine be paid to recreate those oaks? Well, there is no such amount. The highest chalk mountains that survived the three glacier periods, how many money should we get to renew the glaciers. Well, some of those chalk rocks, they survived the ice ages, but they could not survive the war. So it's an interesting question, how to compensate something that cannot be compensated with money. So we're currently in discussion now, and maybe we will ask Ukrinform to cover his discussion shortly. But as to the territories of the non-conservation areas, I don't want it to sound adventurous, but the Ukrainians lost access to certain territories because those areas are mined, and Cabinet of Ministers says it will take at least 70 years to demine them, and to restore the contaminated soils it would be an indefinite period of time to restore those soils. So meanwhile the demining is going on, it would be okay for Russia to provide the equal area to be used by Ukraine. In this way we would return natural resources to us. For example, Russia could provide those lands for 70 years, meanwhile demining is going on. Theoretically, why not? There were no such cases in the world, but why not if the decision will be like that? And Russia, as a capitulating party, may do it, may be forced to do it, but we cannot do it in the dimension of nature. Meanwhile, there is a war going on there. We have to make sure that all those areas that are not assigned the status of conservation area to receive them. So let's imagine Russia loses, they capitulate. What should we do? We should start reconstruction, and we will be given billions of hryvnias to rebuild Ukraine. But all the materials will be mined in Ukrainian nature for that money, for which are needed for reconstruction. So our thoughts is how to preserve the most valuable, because it will be lost during the reconstruction, and it will be a pity if Russia destroyed one part of Ukraine already and another part will be destroyed by us during our reconstruction. So it's not going to look like a victory. So I think that one of our tasks today in evaluation of losses, we obviously cannot calculate it in figures. We cannot say how many eagles or lizards or turtles died. We don't know that number and we will never find out. But what we can say for sure that this area was damaged, and this area and the equal area should be provided the conservation status, because their equal area is already destroyed. So there will be no amount of money to renew those damaged areas, but we can preserve the existing territories, and we may receive the same number or the same amount of conservation territories. It will be the right gesture on our part in parallel with reparations and the rest of the stuff. Well, your proposal is very logical, but what should we do to have it implemented? Do we understand for the time being how many such potential places do we have now that can be assigned the status of conservation areas? Do we understand how to work that way to make it before the reconstruction? Well, I hope to answer just a half of your question. It's very good that among the panelists there are people who are responsible for this in Ukraine, and within the last year, meanwhile, we sent our salaries to the armed forces, and we spent our time for the initiatives on establishing the new conservation areas. Well, some might say, what are you doing? First we have to win, and I'm asking why. If you visit our page in Facebook, you see a lot of fundraisers for the victory. So we do a lot to support Ukrainian army, but that professional mission that we may fulfill is to initiate the establishment of a new conservation territories. There are wonderful territories, including those in occupied areas. Well, we can rename the cities in occupied areas. For example, Dovzhansk in Luhansk region, it ceased to be Sverdlovsk. Well, in occupation, it was not a problem for Ukraine. And meanwhile, Ukraine in no way recognizes the self-proclaimed republics or the independence of the areas which were captured by the military. So in the same way, we may establish the conservation areas in the south and in the east. Well, this territory will be under our control shortly, and this is when we will physically establish such natural reserves there, and there will be more and more of such territories. And I think if all of it would be implemented, it would cover the amount of the damaged territories twice or thrice. It would be a beautiful gesture by Ukraine. I would like one national park to be, at least one national park to be established in the occupied areas. It would show that this territory is temporarily occupied, that the state recognizes its value, and tomorrow it will be liberated, and we won't just go there to that place, we will go to a national park there. So this is my part of the answer, and I will probably pass the microphone. Yes, thank you. I agree with Mr. Oleksiy. Very correct approach, and the ministry works on a systemic area in this. On this matter, we expanded the territory of National Park Zharlgatsky. This is what we were talking about. The territory is currently occupied, but we don't wait for the occupation. We already get involved in this matter. The territory is huge. The Bay of Zharlgach, and plus the territory was not expropriated from a local enterprise. I think we will be able to make it, and on the state level and in the local level, such work will be ongoing. Those are very right steps. We have many projects. We cooperate with the civil organizations such as the Group for Natural Protection, and not only it. There are applications for expansion, and we will continue working in this area. Mr. Bohdan, we will be having a question to you. We're talking about temporarily occupied or deoccupied territories. If you have anything to add there, please add. But talking about the territories under Ukrainian control, we understand that they suffer from war. The occupiers continue shelling the territory. So what are the problems in this field? Good afternoon, everybody. Well, our organization deals with documenting the potential harm to the environment. Our volunteers small volunteer different mass media, and they look for the news from the verified sources about damage to environment. We document the cases both in the areas under control of the Ukrainian government and the occupied areas as well. I've just checked half an hour ago. We have 990 cases of damage to the environment all across Ukrainian map, including 123 cases of damage of the ecosystems, and 93 is in damage to the sea ecosystems. Obviously, they all result from fires, shellings in the middle of autumn last year. For example, when the fire season was over, there were 4,400,000 hectares of areas damaged by wildfires. It's 4% of total area of Ukraine. This includes not only forests but fields which were suffering from fires as well. Those are the details from the European Regional Center for Fire Monitoring, and they monitor and fight the fires. I think that's a reliable source of information. As to the forest, there were 300,000 hectares of forest areas where fires erupted. Sometimes they were superficial, but in other cases the forest was burned to the ground, and it would take hundreds of years to renew the forest in that area. So we cannot say for sure to what extent this or that territory suffered, but the fact of damage we may document it. And as to the explosions, I agree with Oleksiy. There were millions of explosions in natural ecosystems, and there are some which are exploding in forests, not only in residential areas, and it results in contamination with the residues of the explosive devices, explosive substances like TNT, which is used in the ammunition. Some part of it penetrates the ground, and it's a high toxic and carcinogenic substance which may accumulate and penetrate to the water horizons and contaminate the water in wells with the toxic compounds, the products of TNT metabolism, the rocket fuel from those obsolete rockets that Russia uses to shell our military and civilians. Those rockets, they have highly toxic rocket fuel. No one was thinking about that back in Soviet era. The weapons were designed to kill, so nobody was thinking about it. So that's another way of impact on the environment. Thank you for this, Mr. Bohdan. We hope that you're with us, that you're hearing us. Please get involved in our conversation. You are the representative of an international organization which fights for our environment, deals with its problem on a systemic basis. So talking about the international level, what do you document? What do you tell the world about those problems that we have here, something that may influence or impact the whole ecosystem? Well, we were viewing the Chernobyl natural reserve after Russian occupation. There are hundreds of elements of destroyed infrastructure, and my colleagues already described the situation which resulted from the Russian aggression and how we lose the invaluable nature that we have now, specifically in the territories where the intense battles are going on. And I want to pay attention to another important moment which was brought up by Oleksiy about the necessity to preserve nature in Ukraine outside the area of active battles. For example, we have a large number of forests which were identified by the WWF of Ukraine as the pro forests. Half of them are only in conservation areas which are assigned the relevant conservation status, or they are parts of some national parks or wildlife sanctuaries. So in a view of a growing need for post-war recovery of Ukraine, which may start now, there is a risk that we may lose those territories because of our irresponsibility. So now it's critically necessary to preserve these unique riches of Ukraine. I want to draw your attention to the petition on the creation on the state level conservation area in Carpathy region. It already has 25,000 votes to urge President to preserve the unique ecosystems existing in Ukrainian Carpathians. It will be a good gesture by the President of Ukraine that we may be able to preserve those forests, those valuable ecosystems which are located on tops of the mountains, and they are unique in the world in view of its biodiversity for future generations. They are important not as the elements of nature, but they are unique ecosystems which provide for the well-being of the population. They preserve the major part of the water which is consumed by local population, maintaining the water balance. And the well-being of every Ukrainian is their constitutional right for the safe environment. And I'm sure that such initiatives as to create the conservation area of Witness Vidovets in those areas will not only preserve the ancient forests and the ecosystems, but they will defend the constitutional right of Ukrainians to safe environment. In continuation of your concerns in view of the situation in Ukraine, the risk to lose the biodiversity, it all urges to the creation of national strategy for preserving biodiversity, which would be in compliance with our Euro-Atlantic aspirations. It means that 30% of the territory of Ukraine have to be assigned the conservation area status, and about 60% will be having severe reserve regime, because the natural ecosystems they provide for climatic sustainability of our state, and they provide so-called ecosystem services, just like clean air or availability of water. And if now we start taking care about creation of such reserves, assignment of this status to 30% of the territory of Ukraine, we may ensure the supply of the fresh water in the country and reduce the risk of droughts, which may result from destruction of the natural ecosystems, which work as the stabilizers or the vessels for accumulating the water in such territory. So it's important not to let destroy something that was not destroyed by the war. So talking about the conservation system, it needs reformation, and Ukraine, in cooperation with the partners, is involved in the project, and it is supported by KfW, the German bank. Well, the project was to implement regulations in assignment of conservation status to certain areas in Carpathian Mountains in the territory of Ukraine, and we have to make sure that the relevant regime is being observed in this territory. It's one of the steps that Ukraine has to undertake on its way to integration into European Union, because the principles in management of the valuable natural resources are critical for compliance in terms of Ukrainian aspirations. For example, the Emerald Network legislation will allow Ukrainians to reinforce ecological stability and security in the country, and to provide the majority of the population with natural resources in a sustainable way is directly related to the economic security. We will have the constant cash generating capacities. It would also allow to provide the agrarian sector with such critical resource as water, because without existence of Polissa ecosystem, which builds the river of Dnipro, life of 20 million Ukrainians depend on it in the central and southern part of Ukraine. So the lives depend on the operation of the Polissa natural ecosystem. So it's important to adopt the law on the Emerald Network, which will ensure the preservation of proper ecosystems to preserve the natural resources in Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Bohdan. I will give a couple of minutes to Mr. Bohdan to answer this question. For what I understand, there was work done by the representative of nature protection organizations along with the international organizations as to bringing this specific territory into compliance with those requirements. So how can Ministry of Environment get involved in adoption of this resolution? Well, we work with Bohdan in all those areas. There is application about Swidovets, which was approved by the ministry, and now the regional administration has to coordinate it with the respective users of that area. There is a lot of issues to be solved, but the work is underway, and I hope we will get the results shortly. As to the reformation of the conservation areas, the minister set such a task already. We have to create the relevant conservation agency. It's long due, and all the nature conservation activists, they await for the establishment of such agency. We take all the necessary steps in that direction. Well, what else? Well, thank you. We have another speaker joining us now. Mr. Viktor, are you with us? Have you joined us? I'm asking our technical team to bring Mr. Viktor on the screen. I hope you're hearing us. Yes, I can hear you quite well. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking a little bit about Askania-Nova here. Mr. Oleksiy said that this is a unique experience of operation under Ukrainian flag of the conservation area in occupation, so we were all waiting for you to join us. Please tell us what is going on and what was going on all that time. What is the condition of the Biosphere Reserve? What can you say about that? Askania-Nova is occupied since February 24, 2022. Since the very first hours of the full-scale invasion, we ended up under occupation. Russian armored material was in Askania-Nova at 9 o'clock that day. You understand, all the government institutions were paralyzed back then. We were able to seek subsidies to pay salaries. That was critical for us. Those are the protected articles of expenses. So personnel who was working in that area, they were fulfilling their duties, and we had to create the conditions for them to maintain their existence. The rest of the things, we were forced to solve everything by ourselves, without instructions, without explanations, because everybody had their specific situation, and we had to solve our situations quite promptly because the time required sometimes drastic decisions. Askania-Nova is not quite a regular biospheric reserve. It's a non-standard conservation area. There are natural ecosystems in Askania-Nova, but there are artificial ecosystems. It's a complex conglomerate which unites historic collections with natural ecosystems. So what's the complexity? The steppe ecosystems are easier to work with, but Askania-Nova is sustainable, it's self-regulating, and it does not require daily interventions in some cases. But as to the collections of the animals, they require routine supervision on a daily basis. We were able to solve that issue quite promptly, and we were existing autonomously for a year, but in Ukrainian format. Again, I want to extend my appreciation of the input of Oleksiy. Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, because they were a mediator who was accumulating financial funds that were purpose for Askania-Nova. Unfortunately, we had no access to the government money, and the accounts were blocked as well, and we were not able to use the funds for fodder, fuel, veterinary medicines, which were critically required to maintain the operation of the ecosystem. About 3,500 animals are in the zoo of Askania-Nova. That's with no account of the animals who live in the open steppe or otherwise live in Askania-Nova during their migration phase. A part of Askania-Nova is in dry steppe, and it requires regular irrigation during dry periods of summer. We made it through that period. We knew the situation could have complicated, and we were preparing some reserves for critical period. We calculated the situation. We were ready that the occupational administration will be entering the institution sooner or later, but since it's Ukrainian territories, it's Ukrainian conservation, we had to make sure that even during the period of occupational administration, Ukrainian collections are provided with the necessary resource for their sustainable living. The fodder is used currently, which was procured by us. So in this context, I think we did even more than we were expected to, because when we disclosed this situation with the administration being captured, it was surprising to everybody, because no one expected that an institution may exist for more than a year in the occupied territory, and it may exist by itself. Obviously, there were attempts to break the situation. It's not like persuasion to cooperate, but they were gauging us. I had a couple of unpleasant conversations. I can tell about them openly now. They ended with threats, but no other consequences. I was staying in Askania-Nova until the latest moment, so I had to solve all the administrative issues in the territory under Ukrainian government control. But until the end of March, we were working in autonomous mode. We were reporting properly. The administration still works, and the people who had to stay in the conservation area, they stayed there and they fulfilled their duties. I'm talking about the technical personnel. They are over there. They continue supervising the collections, and there were people who were brave enough, and regardless of the obvious risks to their security, they refused to cooperate until the very last week. The situation was complicated, but we solved it. There is support provided to those people. They will be paid their salaries, and until this very moment we continue operating. And now we work as a research and scientific institution, because the scientists who left the conservation area, they work on a remote basis. We submit relevant reports, and we are preparing to the occupation, because it will be coming sooner or later, and we have to be ready for that. Right now the situation is such that Askania-Nova has not suffered relatively, well, I'm saying relatively, because comparing to other conservation areas, the situation is really different and it's better. But until that very moment, Askania-Nova was in the rear of the enemy, and it was remote from the forward edge of the battle area. So at the beginning of the occupation, the forward edge was near Dnipro, and even after the occupation of Kherson region, it's still there, it's remaining on that line. So for Askania-Nova, the consequences are not so critical as for other conservation areas. From the very first days and until now, for Askania-Nova, the biggest challenge is the passage of aviation over the conservation area. You may imagine how stressful it is for the animals, so this is where the problems arise. The situation is more simple for Askania because it's isolated to a certain extent. It's like an appendix between two main ways. It's the open plain landscape, which is not fit for military fortifications and to set up defense there. But the occupiers are preparing for the defense, and situation is identical with other settlements in Kherson region, so covering themselves with the civil population, including in Askania-Nova. There is the material based in Askania-Nova, the personnel is being billeted in the settlements, in the villages, and they use civilians as the human shield, which creates additional risk. And also don't forget about the problem of the equipment, which can be, so to say, evacuated, as the occupiers call it, as the front line will be moving east. The occupiers may grab all of that equipment with them. Well, the relocation of it is a fantastic option. Well, and obviously the occupiers may bring some harm. It's an obvious risk, but on the other hand, we have to understand the problem. Realization of the threat is crucial. We have to maintain the degree, but at the same time we have to operate the facts. The occupiers violated everything they could violate, and the damage they inflicted is enough to operate the obvious facts that are proven and which can be used as evidence to enforce reparations and so on. Unfortunately, there is a lot of unverified information which doesn't play in favor of our conservation area itself, because in that murky water, when a critical problem arises, you may not see some real movements, because the society knows that there is some problem in Askania-Nova, and then it's debunked. Then yet another case like that, and it's debunked again, and it results that sometimes we may not result properly, we may not react properly in a real situation. So we monitor the situation, and we are being monitored as well, I have to say, because there are certain commentaries and responses to our comments, but the situation is generally under control. We have personnel who supervises the collections. Unfortunately, people who stayed there, they didn't have such a right to stay there, but unfortunately they did so. But let's not idealize the situation. It's the problem that should be solved after the occupation of the territories, but for the time being, currently we made it through this year. We ensured the supervision of the collections thanks to our calculations, thanks to the procurement of the fodders. It did not result in a catastrophe as of now, but we have to understand that all the problems for Askania-Nova are ahead, because the movement of the front line will result in inadvertent losses. It's only the matter of scale and time. Thank you, Mr. Viktor. Do we have any questions on the floor? No, we do not. Thank you for this information. Thank you for working even in such difficult conditions. Thank you for taking care about our biospheric reserve. I think that maybe the last question of mine to all of you will be about the time that we will need afterwards, after the war. We understand that we won't be able to renew everything because there are some inadvertent processes, but irreversible processes. But again, how many times are we going to need to renew what was destroyed and violated? Hopefully Askania-Nova would not face such problems as other conservation areas did. So what are the steps to be taken to overcome those future problems? Well, as to the time, it would be incorrect to set some limitations. Every species, they have their renewal period. What Oleksiy started with, I have to agree. We will lose something for sure, some species, but we may only hope that it would not happen like this. Maybe something will be renewed. I hope that all of them will continue existing. As to the territories, a lot of time will be needed. I don't know how long, decades maybe. So it's difficult to talk about time, but we will take all the necessary steps in all levels, on the level of ministry, on the level of local governments. So something like that. We're having a question on the floor. Yulia Abakumova, Ukrinform. I would like to ask about the area. What's the area of the conservation areas that were liberated? And we've heard about Askania, but how do the other captured natural reserves operate? Do you have such information? Well, talking about the occupied territories, for example, the park of Jarlhaj, there is the director of the enterprise. Just like in Askania-Nova, the director is not physically located there, and the scientific department, they can work remotely, for example, but the security service obviously doesn't work in Jarlhaj. They are on suspension. Vykhor is deoccupied now. They work in the full-fledged mode. The director and the state guard service and the scientific department, they all fulfill their functions there. As I said, Jarlhaj National Park, Biloberezhia, Sviatoslava, their office is in the continental Ukraine. There are no occupational forces there, but the Kinburn Spit is occupied and there is no access to that territory. Vasyliuk is occupied. Myatida National Azov Park is occupied too. In the same way, the director and the scientific departments, they are working remotely, and the security service is suspended. Well, anyone else I forgot? Oleshkivsky Piski, the territory is completely occupied. I'm talking about the state level conservation areas, but there are more such that don't have special administrations. They only have the conservation status, and for those territories it's even more complicated. I mean, in terms of understanding of what's going on there. Thank you. We have another question. Good afternoon. Rubrica, Eco Rubrica issue. I have a question to Mr. Eduard regarding the National Park Tuzlivsky Liman. For what I know now, the rehabilitation center for dolphins is discussed there. and expansion of the area, the Saksky Peresip and the Lake of Saki. I was in communication with Irina Hrystyuk, the director of that park, and she said that currently there is a lot of bureaucracy for around allocation of the land, and they cannot proceed to the further steps in this direction. So what is your stance? Well, our stance again is what we've been talking about today. It's one of the key areas where we work in the expansion of the areas of the natural reserves. It's one of the priority areas of our work. We understand that it's crucially important, and Tuzlevsky Liman National Park, they really submitted the application for expansion of the areas. The military administration, for what I know, works on that application, and we will see what obstacles we are about to face, or maybe we will not be facing any. I cannot comment it at this moment. What you mentioned about the Dolphin Rehabilitation Center, we all understand. Everybody who listens to us, everybody understands that the harm on the sea mammals is immense, and we understand that there is no rehabilitation center for dolphins in Ukraine, and it is really needed, and not only as a delphinarium. It should be looking like a natural habitat where they may be able to feel as if in natural environments. So their proposal is, in my opinion, absolutely correct. As to some technical things, you understand, the center is the idea, and the idea is in expansion. So here we unite a number of things. So yes, it's necessary. Those are the steps to be taken in that part of Ukraine, in Odessa region. So we're working on it. But yeah, but they said that the allocation of the lands is bureaucratized because there is no head of local administration appointed. Well, it's not our competency. I cannot comment it. If there is no head, there is an active head of the administration, so it's a complex issue regarding those lands. There are lands which belong to the competences of the cabinet of ministers, and probably there are territories which will be expropriated by the Odessa regional military administration. It's a matter that requires a lot of work. Thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you for the interest to this topic. I want to thank us speakers for this conversation. We hope that such collaboration of public actors and our governments will be fruitful, and we will all work on preservation of our nature to the maximum extent. For the time being, our team is working on our schedule for tomorrow, so follow our announcements, bear with us, work together for our victory. Thanks to our armed forces for this opportunity to have events like this. So glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.